This is Stefanos Tsitsipas predictably crashing out of the first round of the 2024 US Open after yet another backhand disaster. When a top tennis player has a noticeable hole in their game, it's common for fans to magnify their flaws and focus on all the weaknesses. At that point, it doesn't really matter what the player does or doesn't do. The only thing we see is their flaw. And really, it seems like a no-brainer. But what if I told you we'd been looking in the wrong direction all along? What if Tsitsipas's shortcomings this season had nothing to do with the holes in his game? And what if there was a simple fix once and for all? I tracked most of Steph's 2024 season, and the answers that I found were a little bit more complicated than what I was expecting. Okay, so for the most part, 2024 was one of the worst seasons for Tsitsipas, which is funny because he won a Masters 1000 title and actually had a few other big moments. But really, the negatives far outweighed the positives. He finished the year outside the top 10 for the first time since 2018, and also missed out on the ATP finals for the first time in 6 years. On top of that, there was the nasty split with his dad as coach back in the summer, coupled with a lot of stinging comments from those that had previously worked with him. Tsitsipas was down in the weeds for most of the season, and I noticed a super important trend which I want to point out. But first, if you love what we're doing here at Courtside Tennis, be sure to like and subscribe. Throughout the year, Tsitsipas began to struggle more than ever on his strengths in addition to the already existing holes in his game. Essentially, Steph is one of the best servers out there, and his destructive forehand immediately neutralizes many of his weaknesses. He was able to reach 2 Grand Slam finals, win the ATP finals, a couple of Masters titles, and finish inside the top 6 for half a decade. But once the strengths began to break down, the weaknesses were equally amplified, and it was a slippery slope from then on. It didn't seem obvious at first, but the truth is that Tsitsipas went from finishing 2023 with the highest percentage of service points won to finishing 2024 in 16th place by the same metric. As expected, there was a concurrent downward trend in the percentage of first and second serve points won, hold percentage, and an all-time high double fault percentage. Tsitsipas's double fault percentage of 3.8% was higher than the tour average of 3.3%, and only 10 players inside the top 50 hit more double faults than Steph. Clearly, something went wrong with the serve. At the beginning of the year, he tried to tinker with it, changing from the platform to a pinpoint stance. And the reason for the change wasn't even owed to that back injury he was carrying from last year. Tsitsipas said he was just trying things out, and we all thought he was looking in the wrong direction because the logical thing to do would be to improve his weaknesses rather than going for marginal gains on his biggest weapon. Speaking of biggest weapons, it's clear as day that Tsitsipas has been over-reliant on his forehand to do most of the heavy lifting. While I didn't notice any significant decline in his forehand quality, it seemed that more and more opponents were able to mitigate the damage from his forehand. On the one hand, it speaks about the overall improvement in quality and depth on the ATP Tour. But on the other hand, it could just be that Steph had been found out by his opponents, who mostly entered into the match with a similar tactic, which was to avoid the Tsitsipas forehand and go to the backhand as often as possible. Now, we all know that boosting your return game is more difficult than, let's say, fixing your serve. In general, you could say that ATP players don't work on their returns as much as they would on the serve. The Tsitsipas backhand has also been a relative weakness for years, so the default strategy would be to target it. And here's why. Steph needs a lot of time to set up his one-handed backhand. He's one of the more surface-sensitive players on tour because the ball skids on grass and also travels fast on hard courts. And once that extra time is taken away, it really affects Steph's timing. Tsitsipas thrives on clay, and with Monte Carlo being one of the slowest, if not the slowest clay court out there, it's no surprise that Tsitsipas always happens to play his best tennis there. Like, this guy has more Monte Carlo titles than even Djokovic. Insanity. But the same can't be said about hard courts, though. When up against big hitters, Tsitsipas is forced to hurry the backhand or chip a return. It's an open secret, really. When Alex de Minaur beat Steph in Acapulco for the first time in 11 attempts, he was hitting 90% of his serves to Tsitsipas's backhand. That's an extreme example because if you only aim for the backhand, you're definitely going to lose the element of surprise and become an open book. However, it's no coincidence that servers are taking aim at his backhand, especially in the clutch moments. Tsitsipas's return numbers aren't ideal for someone as good as he is, and he gets punished a lot on hard courts. In his 7 appearances at the US Open, Tsitsipas has lost 3 times in the first round, 2 times in the second round, and 2 times in the third round. He's never made it past the third round at Flushing Meadows. Compared to clay, Tsitsipas's win percentage on hard courts and grass are not as good, and the simplest explanation is the return. Tennis Abstract shows a 10-match rolling average of Steph's rate of return points won when his opponent lands a first serve to his backhand. As you can see, the backhand return numbers really took a plunge from after the Australian Open last year up until this point. But if you ask me what the real problem was, I'd say let's throw all the analysis out the window and just look at the intangibles. But before I do that, let me tell you about SuckerPunch. Just the other day, I trained with a pro tennis player, and let me tell you, the only reason I survived that workout was because of SuckerPunch's hydration shooters. Well, technically it was a jar of SuckerPunch because I forgot my shooters at home, but you get the idea. Anyway, this stuff works. Each shooter is packed with magnesium, calcium, and potassium, key nutrients that help you recover actively during your time on court. And the best part, use the code Courtside-Punch at checkout to get 25% off your order. I'll leave the link in the description for you below. Okay, so we know that as an athlete, your body, mind, and soul have to be in sync if you want to get the best out of your game. But with tennis, the mental side of things is just a little bit more emphasized. We don't always know what goes on behind the scenes, but Tsitsipas sometimes looked like he had checked out. The constant grind on the tour and the wear and tear that comes with it really affects players differently. Sometimes they fall off during the second half of the season because of fatigue and exhaustion. Other times they experiment with a change in partnership, equipment, or something else to find a new spark. Tsitsipas has done all of this and has come to the conclusion that the problem is long-term burnout. After his loss to Kokkinakis at the US Open, Tsitsipas said that he was nothing compared to the player he once was, and also admitted that things weren't looking good on the mental side. Here's what he said. Quote, "I remember myself playing when I was younger, playing with adrenaline on the court, feeling like my life depends on the match. And these things, I feel like they've faded off. I remember my concentration used to be at its highest, at its peak back then, and that's something that I felt has dropped a little bit. I know it sounds strange, but I feel like I need the hunger to reproduce the hunger I had back then. I really don't know why it has dropped the last couple of months. I would even consider it like 1 or 2 years I've been feeling that way." End quote. Essentially, Tsitsipas just says that he no longer feels that drive, and it's been that way for more than a year now. This coincides with his decline from last year. Tsitsipas said that he has talked with some people and that with the kind of burnout he's experiencing, it doesn't matter whether you stop or not. The damage has already been done. Vacations won't help, staying away from the courts won't either. Man, those are some really deep words. Let me take you back to the beginning of the season. Ahead of the Australian Open, Steph said he was no longer that kid who used to hunt for big wins with nothing to lose. He admitted that there were new kids on the block now and that he needed to remind everyone that he was still a force to be reckoned with. Well, that didn't happen this year, and if anything, it got worse. But circling back to the burnout. I'm no psychologist, but what is Tsitsipas talking about when he says that it doesn't get better with time away? Well, for better understanding, let's classify burnout into 3 categories: overload burnout, under-challenged burnout, and neglect burnout. Most of us are familiar with the overload burnout, the one where you work really hard to achieve your goals and push yourself to the limit up to the point where you neglect your health and other aspects of your personal life. I've felt this way working on the media side in tennis too. Over a long stretch of tournaments where I'm constantly ideating and creating content, I sometimes honestly forget that I'm a person that exists outside the work that I'm doing. And it's not exactly like the high-pressure environments of tournaments help alleviate any stress either. The second type of burnout, or the under-challenged burnout, is kind of like the exact opposite. If you're in this category, you've probably become bored with what you do, and there's not enough mental stimulation to ignite that spark in you. You probably hate your job. In this case, you find yourself tired and burnt out even when you haven't even done much. Now, the final type of burnout, which I think Tsitsipas might have been dealing with, is the neglect burnout. It's basically a situation where you feel helpless in the face of challenges. The people with this type of burnout resort to learned helplessness simply because they feel like they can't do anything to help themselves, even when there are a few options on the table. It's a vicious cycle that leads to a situation where you become passive and stop trying. And although we can't say with 100% certainty if Tsitsipas threw in the towel at some point this season, we know that his former fitness coach called him out for his lack of work ethic. Christos Fiotakis, who walked away from the Tsitsipas team on the eve of Wimbledon, said that he wasn't satisfied with Stefanos' work ethic and that he didn't think the Greek was focused on getting to the top of the rankings or winning Grand Slams. And for that reason, Fiotakis was no longer willing to travel all year round. Not too long after, Tsitsipas' former physio, Jérôme Bianchi, who left the team in 2022, said that Apostolos' coaching during training sessions made it difficult for other players to concentrate, and that Tsitsipas felt trapped. Of course, the Tsitsipases weren't going to let that slide, so they made it clear that they would be pursuing legal action. Now, it's one thing to dismiss these remarks as disingenuous, but it's another thing entirely when multiple team members don't exactly have the best things to say about you. Clearly, there was an issue with the working environment. It doesn't help that Tsitsipas was the best junior in the world and then one of the leaders of the heralded next generation of young superstars meant to replace Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. He was even only one win away from becoming a Grand Slam champion. Damn, he was so close. If he had won the Australian Open last year, he would have been on top of the world. But it didn't happen. Instead, a nagging shoulder injury ruined much of his 2023 season and affected his confidence, and now he's gotten passed by a bunch of players. Since going 2-1 up against Novak in 2019, Tsitsipas has lost his last 11 meetings against Djokovic, including 6 finals. In fact, since that 2021 Roland Garros final, Tsitsipas has only won 1 set against Novak, which is crazy because it's not uncommon for Novak to randomly drop sets to much lower ranked players these days. Tsitsipas is also 0-6 against Alcaraz, 0-3 against Holger Rune, and 0-2 against Arthur Fils. A combined 0-11 against these next-gen guys. Tsitsipas did beat Sinner in Monte Carlo this year, albeit in a controversial fashion, but the point is that Tsitsipas might have lost touch with the player that he once was. With the neglect type of burnout comes a feeling of helplessness because you don't have enough structure, direction, and guidance in place to navigate your challenges. And because of that, you can't meet the expectations you set. Over time, this leads to frustration and a feeling of incompetence. Speaking of not having the right guidance, we saw the messy split between Tsitsipas and his father back in the summer. After his opening round loss to Kei Nishikori at the Canadian Open, Tsitsipas said he was disappointed in his dad and that he deserved a coach who was willing to listen to him. Although Tsitsipas apologized and put up a long, heartfelt post, it's easy to see where the outburst came from. Tsitsipas comes from a relatively modest background. His mom was a tennis pro from the then Soviet Union, while his dad Apostolos was a professional coach in Athens. His mom was more involved early on, but wasn't exactly pushing him to become a professional tennis player. However, once his dad noticed his talent, he gave up everything and dedicated his whole life to training his son. Many people laughed at him for his commitment and risk-taking, but I have to say, seeing your parents do everything to bring out the best in you is kind of beautiful. Tsitsipas knew that, and he appreciated it. They went through financial hardships, but his mother's twin sister and another family friend came through for them. Props to Apostolos for sticking it out. However, the problem, according to many fans, is that Apostolos just didn't know when to let go and allow the boy to become the man. In the last couple of seasons, Tsitsipas had been criticized for retaining his father as his coach, and the consensus was that the Greek would benefit from a different voice in his box. Tsitsipas did say that he felt better having less people on the team, especially after getting rid of Philippoussis. He's since kicked out his dad and is now working with Greek Davis Cup captain Dimitris Hadjiankoglou and will be hoping for some stability ahead of the 2025 season. By the way, if you're looking for complete coverage of the ATP and WTA tours throughout next season, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our newsletter. We cover the action each week and also talk about the storylines that we don't get the time to make videos about. I'll leave the link in the description for you down below. Perhaps one of the most important positives in all of this is that Tsitsipas is willing to seek help on both the holes in his game and on the mental side of things. He wants to work out the kinks once and for all. At 26 years old, there probably needs to be some sense of urgency at this point. My best guess is that the numerous injuries which he suffered this year and last year caused a downward spiral in his confidence, and it was compounded by the fact that he was losing a lot to Alcaraz and the younger guys, which only led to more panic. Coupled with suffering upsets against Lehechka twice, Shapovalov, Thiago Monteiro, Jarry, Struff, Ruusuvuori, Nishikori, Draper, Kokkinakis, Mickelson, and a few other players in addition to coaching instability, led to the overall collapse of Tsitsipas this season. It took all of these problems for Tsitsipas to finally fall out of the top 10, which only goes to show just how good and underappreciated he's been. Imagine dealing with all of this and still being the 11th best tennis player in the world. Guys, we're talking about a player who won the next-gen ATP Finals and ATP Finals in consecutive years, and always reached the semis of a Grand Slam for 5 straight years from 2019 to 2023. For 5 consecutive seasons, Tsitsipas finished inside the top 6 with literally the same backhand and return problems that we all said he had. At the end of the day, maybe the problem is that he's the same player with the same strengths and weaknesses whose development hit a wall last year. He's now getting passed by the younger guys. Who knows? The burnout has taken its toll and the Tsitsipas' stocks might be low at the moment. However, it's a given that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I want to believe that Tsitsipas will eventually break through that glass ceiling. You can't always avoid some of these problems like getting injured or fixing a weak shot in a matter of days or weeks, But there's a whole lot that can be done. With the right structure and stability comes more confidence and a desire to be the very best, and I'm sort of hung up on how Tsitsipas is going to silence the doubters. Tsitsipas isn't going to wake up one day and suddenly have the Jannik Sinner or Djokovic mentality. Still, he's going to have his chances. From the rise of Jannik Sinner, who looked nothing like a world number one in the first half of 2023, we know that changes can happen quickly, even for top players. His best chances will probably be the first 2 slams of the year. He's reached the finals in both the Australian Open and Roland Garros, and has generally had his best results there. He still needs to adapt his game perfectly to grass and give his backhand slice a facelift, and then break the US Open curse, whatever that is. If history tells us anything, I'm not really expecting much at Wimbledon or the US Open, but my money is on Tsitsipas having a strong start to next season, and when that happens, I'm gonna say,
this is exactly, I don't mean to sound like Cat Williams, but this is exactly what I've been waiting for.
Speaking of predictions for 2025, here's another player who I'm super optimistic about entering into the new season.